Cajun-Style Crawfish Etouffee. Once again, it's Cajun style. No Creole, but Cajun. And I'm going to explain some of the difference as I cook throughout my video. And this one is using fresh crawfish. And I even created a broth using the crawfish. So I'm going to show you that too. And remember, if I can cook it, so can you. So go nowhere. Let's create. And what I'm going to do, because I'm not going to use the stuff that you buy already pre-packaged and pre-cooked. I want this 100% natural. What I'm going to do is I'm going to boil them. So I'm going to cook them. And the reason that I decided to boil them is because I want to create my own broth. So I'm doing two things at once. I'm cooking the crawfish, boiling them, and I'm going to also prepare a broth. And I have some garlic, celery, and some onions. The onion doesn't have to look pretty, none of them does. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to add this stuff there too. And I'm going to cook, going to boil this baby and cook the crawfish. I'm not going to cook them all. But I'm going to add some sea salt. And I'm going to add some ground black pepper. As I get the stock ready and the crawfish cooked, let me introduce you some ingredients and some basic concepts. First thing you need to understand, they are Cajun etouffee and they are Creole etouffee. And there are some difference, and I'm going to explain those difference at the end of the video. I'm going to explain it very briefly. And I'm explaining some as I'm cooking. So etouffee means moderate. And it's going to require some thickening process, and that is called the roux. And roux consists, depending on what kind, if it's Cajun versus Creole. If it's Creole, it's going to require butter. If it's Cajun, it's traditionally oil, but I'm going to make an exception. I'm going to use butter with some oil. I'm going vegetable. And you're going to need all-purpose flour. Now, this is going to be a ratio. If I end up using 8 tablespoons of butter, then I will have to use half a cup of the flour. Maybe a little bit more because I'm going to use a little bit of the oil. I'm going to mix both of them. And that's how I'm going to prepare my roux. Also in Louisiana, you have the Trinity. And the Trinity is these 3 ingredients. It's called the onions, and I use half, which are chopped, celery, which are chopped, and I use 1 bell pepper. This is about 1 celery, maybe 1.5. Those 3 are the Trinity. In addition to that, I'm going to have some other ingredients. Natural, I'm going to use green onions, and as you notice, I chop it, and I'm using the bottom tasty part of the onion. I'm going to have some paprika, which is needed. I'm going to have, in my case, a lot of people don't use black ground pepper. I'm going to use some garlic. I have about 6-7 teeth, which are cut in tiny pieces. One thing about the Cajun etouffee is that tend to be spicier, so I'm going to use some ground Cajun red pepper. But I also bought some additional red pepper. I'm going to use portion of that hot red pepper because I want it spicier. I'm going to add a little bit more. And I'm going to need some salt. Of course, I'm going to need some of the stock. And I'm going to need the crawfish, which is the tail portion. I'm going to get the meat out, and I'm going to use that. And At the end I'm gonna garnish, so I have here some, some parsley, which I'm going to chop further and use it for garnish. And I'm going to I'm going to steam some rice too. I'm going to cook some white rice. This is pretty much ready. I cooked this for about 15-20 minutes. See how nice that stock looks, dark and beautiful. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to get the crawfish out and I'm going to let it cool. So you start taking the meat out, twist. If you feel that you can get meat out of this, just leave it there, throw the stuff away, and then you pull the meat out, or just break. It's easy to break with your finger. And put some of that stuff out. See how easy? So I'm going to use this pot because it can hold heat pretty good. Couple of notches above medium. Going to use a little bit of oil, just a little bit, maybe a tablespoon, if that. And 8 tablespoons of butter, unsalted butter. And we're going to let it melt first, okay? I lowered the heat a couple notches below medium now. What I'm going to do, I'm going to try with half a cup. I might need a little bit more. Important thing is that you cannot let this burn. You have to move it around. You're creating like, for lack of better terms, for layman terms, you're creating like a paste. And you're going to move this around to get somewhat semi-solid. Make sure the edges don't burn, so keep moving. Just looking at it, I think I'm going to have to add a little bit more, about quarter more. So let me get that, just a little bit more. Because I didn't account for the tablespoon of the oil. You're going to mix it well and continually stirring this. I'm going to do this for a few minutes until it gets somewhat solid. After a few minutes, when it gets somewhat solid, once again, make sure that the edges are not stuck. Start adding the trinity. Let's start with the onions. Celery. Pepper. Do this for a few minutes. After a minute or 90 seconds of this, add your garlic on top. Your green onions. My personal touch with the red hot pepper. That thins well. See how solid it is? You have to smother this. Etouffee. And now what you're going to do, you're going to add your liquid. The amount is going to depend of how much stuff you have here. It's about a cup in my case. Maybe a little bit more. What you're going to do now, just make it 2 cups. You're going to add the paprika. I like pepper, so I'm going to put a little bit, not a lot. The cayenne pepper, if you want it to kick. And you're going to add the salt. If you need more the stock, add it now. So make sure you have the flavor that you want. When it start simmering or boiling a little bit, just turn it down to a couple notches below medium. You cover it and let it cook for about 30 minutes, maybe 40. That's simple. So it's been about 35 minutes. Something I wanted to mention is, you notice I didn't use tomatoes. It's because, once again, this is a Cajun type, not the Creole type. One of the things, not tomatoes. So the reason I'm adding the crawfish now is because it's cooked. If you were using another type of meat uncooked, you would have to cook it clearly. Maybe the last 10 minutes of the cooking process would have been added the meat. But this crawfish already been cooked. So what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to add this, and also going to add some of the green onions. And I'm going to add this stuff now. Look at this meat, huh? Woohoo! Notice how relatively thick it is. Let me add the onions too. And this stuff is ready. Look at this beauty. See, relatively thick. Not too thick, but relatively thick. And you cannot do it thicker, you cannot do it less thick. It's to you, whatever you want to, your preference, but you would have to play with the stock. This stuff is perfect. So it's a couple difference between the Creole and the Cajun etouffee. The Cajun is it tends to be spicier. Another thing is that I don't ever seen people using tomatoes for the Cajun one. Well, the Creole one uses tomatoes. Another thing I noticed is that another difference is that the Creole one goes with the butter all the time. It's cooked with the butter, the roux. While the Cajun tend to use oil, although you can use butter too, by the way, or mix. But the spiciness, how you prepare the roux, as well as the tomatoes aspect tend to be some of the differences, that This one have a good spicy, but it's a good spicy. It's not overwhelming that you cannot eat it. This is actually perfect.